Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. We're really going deep today with a topic that always seems to spark a lot of debate. And to be honest, sometimes it's just straight up misrepresented.
Yeah.
We're talking about the roles and experiences of women in Islam. And you guys know me by now. I'm always up for a good challenge, especially when it comes to a subject this important.
Absolutely.
So you, our amazing listener, you sent over these excerpts from Women in Islam, what the Qur'an and Sunnah Say by Abdur Raheem Kidwai.
Great book.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, this book, it does not mess around. It dives right into the core Islamic texts, we're talking Quran and Hadiths, to really lay out what's being said about women. Now, I know for some, Hadiths might be a little less familiar. They're essentially this collection of sayings and actions that are attributed to the Prophet Muhammad,
Yeah.
offering guidance and context for how we understand the Quran, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the Sunnah, that's like the Prophet's way of life, his actions, teachings, all of it, which is super important in Islam. So we're dealing with some pretty major stuff here.
Yeah, you've got that right. And what's really interesting about the way Kidwai approaches this is he goes right at it, you know?
Yeah.
He doesn't shy away from those more complicated aspects or the historical weight of it all. Like, he sets the stage by really emphasizing that Islam, at its heart, is all about creating well-being for everyone. Not just men, not just women, everyone. He's talking about individual flourishing, but also a just society as a whole. But then he kind of hits you with this truth bomb. What we actually see happening sometimes in Muslim communities, it doesn't always line up with that ideal of justice, you know what I mean?
Totally. And I really appreciate how he calls out that disconnect right away in the preface. He's basically saying, don't just take my word for it, and definitely don't go cherry picking verses to fit your own agenda. He's pushing us to look at the bigger picture here. And part of that is understanding that sometimes cultural interpretations and practices, they can end up overshadowing the original message of the texts themselves.
Exactly. It's like he's handing us this magnifying glass and saying, let's examine this together, but carefully and critically. Let's not jump to any conclusions here. And that's really key because he's about to take us on this journey deep into the core of the matter how Islam views men and women.
Yeah, and this is where it gets super interesting because Kidwai, he isn't pretending that the Quran says men and women are the exact same. He acknowledges, look, there are differences that the text recognize between genders. But, and this is a big but, he emphasizes that those differences, they're not about some kind of hierarchy. They're about mutual respect and having complementary roles.
Exactly. It's about recognizing and valuing those differences without trying to force a power dynamic on top of it.
Yeah.
This whole concept of complementarity, it challenges that very common idea that equality has to mean sameness. And this isn't just some abstract idea either. It actually has real implications for how we then understand all those verses and hadiths about women that we're going to be looking at.
Totally. And speaking of real implications, one thing that really jumped out at me was Kidwai's focus on justice as like a core Islamic principle. It's not just about saying, okay, men and women are separate but equal and then just washing our hands of it. He's talking about actively preventing oppression and actually ensuring fairness for everyone.
Right, exactly. It's about creating a society where everybody has the opportunity to thrive, to reach their full potential, and gender shouldn't play a part in that.
Okay, so we've got this foundation now, well-being for all, recognizing differences without creating a hierarchy, and this commitment to justice. With all that in mind, are you ready to dive into some specific examples? Because I am dying to unpack some of these verses, some of these hadiths, and see how they connect to these big ideas.
Oh, let's do it. Kidwai definitely doesn't hold back, and we won't either.
Okay, so Kidwai, he doesn't just like drop these huge ideas on us and then just disappear. He actually walks us through all these different verses and hadiths. And get this, he organizes them by theme, which I have to say my brain definitely appreciates.
Yeah, it's a really helpful way to approach it.
It's like he's created this roadmap for navigating these texts that, let's be real, can be kind of dense and complicated sometimes.
Totally. It's like you can actually see the forest for the trees now, We're not just getting bogged down in trying to understand individual verses. We can actually see the bigger picture, see how it all connects.
Exactly. So the first theme he digs into is this idea of equal reward and accountability, which honestly, that just jumped out at me right away. Because you know how sometimes you'll hear people try to argue that Islam pushes women into this second-class spiritual status.
Right.
Well, Kidwai, he's not here for it. He's like, nope. He brings out all these verses that emphasize how both men and women are called to be good people, to do good deeds, and that they're both promised that same reward in the afterlife.
Yeah, it's this powerful message of equality. And it's not just in one place either. It pops up all throughout the Quran. Like, for example, there's this verse in Surah Al-Azab, verse 35, that lists all these amazing qualities, things like faith, obedience, truthfulness, patience, humility, charity, all this stuff that leads to God's forgiveness and a great reward.
Yeah.
And it very clearly mentions both men and women. Like, for every single one of those qualities, it's not even a question.
It's like, hello, you missed the memo.
Mm.
We're all on the same playing field here, you know? It reminds me of this other verse, verse 9.71 from Surah At-Tawbah, that basically says, believing men and women, they're protectors and helpers of one another. They encourage each other to do good. They forbid evil. They pray together. They give charity, and they obey God and his messenger. Like, it's a partnership. We are all in this together, all striving for that same goal.
Absolutely. And that emphasis on individual responsibility, that's huge. Like, you don't get a free pass to heaven, and you definitely don't get a VIP ticket just because of your gender. It's about your actions, your choices. That's what really matters.
Okay, get ready for this next theme, because I feel like this is one that everyone can relate to no matter what your background is. And that is the idea that mothers hold a special place.
Right. It's a universal value.
It really is. And the Quran does not plot around when it comes to honoring moms. It's actually really beautiful.
Yeah.
Like verses 31.1 through and 46.15, those just hit you right in the feels. They talk about the pain of childbirth, those years of nurturing and care. And it's like the Quran's just saying, hey, appreciate your mother.
And it's not just about the emotional side of things either. It's also about recognizing that mothers have this crucial role in shaping their children's faith, their character, who they become.
Totally. Like verse 46.1 scene, for instance, talks about how it's the responsibility of both parents, both mothers and fathers, to instill that belief in God in their kids. It's a team effort, right?
Yeah.
It's about working together to raise good human beings.
Exactly. And that whole emphasis on the mother's influence, it's especially striking when you remember what the historical context was. In so many cultures back then, mothers were kind of pushed to the sidelines. Their contributions weren't really valued in the same way. But the Quran is coming in and saying, nope, mothers are the backbone of society and their role is absolutely essential.
Okay. Deep breaths, everyone, because we're about to dive into a topic that tends to, well, let's just say it can be a little controversial. And that is the whole marriage, divorce, and justice thing.
Yeah, this is where things can definitely get a little heated, and it's super important to approach these verses with, like, sensitivity and nuance, you know?
Absolutely. And Kidwai, to his credit, he doesn't shy away from those tougher questions. He goes straight into things like polygamy and divorce, which, let's be real, those are often used to paint this really negative picture of Islam.
Right.
But what really struck me was, even though the Quran does allow for things like polygamy, it's only under very specific circumstances. And it repeatedly emphasizes how important justice is, how important kindness and mutual consent are.
Exactly. It's not just a free-for-all. Like, for instance, verse 4.3 very clearly states that if a man cannot treat multiple wives justly, if he can't do that, then he should only marry one. And when it comes to divorce, the Quran constantly calls for husbands to be honorable and kind, even while they're going through that separation process.
Yeah, it's about prioritizing fairness, prioritizing compassion, even when things are really emotionally charged. Which, come on, divorce is never easy.
Never.
Kidwai even brings up verses like 2.231 and 65.6 that specifically talk about the importance of financial support for women, especially if they're pregnant or breastfeeding.
It's about recognizing that in these situations, women are often the ones in a more vulnerable position, and the Quran goes to great lengths to make sure they're protected.
Okay, one more theme before we jump into some seriously amazing stories. Kidwai called this section Protection from Harm and Slander.
Yeah, this is where we see the Quran taking a really strong stance against any kind of sexual misconduct, false accusations, really any form of abuse or exploitation of women.
It's actually incredibly empowering. Verses like 17.32, 24.2, and 33.58, they make it crystal clear. Sexual immorality, it's condemned, and both men and women are held accountable.
Absolutely.
But here's what I find so interesting. The Quran goes a step further by specifically protecting women from false accusations, which sadly were a big deal back then.
Oh, yeah.
Like verses like 24.4 and then 24.23, 25, they establish serious consequences for anyone who tries to slander chaste women. Like, they require strong evidence and lay down some pretty harsh punishments for making false accusations.
It's about creating this culture of respect, this culture of accountability, where women know they're going to be safe and their voices are going to be heard.
I love that. So we've covered a lot of ground here, and I'm curious what's resonating with you so far. What are your thoughts on how the Quran addresses these ideas of equality, respect, and justice?
You know, honestly, one of the things I love about this book is that it doesn't just like throw all these verses and concepts at you and then just call it a day.
Kidwai actually brings the Quran to life
Okay, ready?
by
Here it
showing us
is.
the
At the
stories
end of this
of
podcast, please
these
share your
incredible
thoughts on the
women that
book.
are
And
mentioned
if you
in the
enjoy
text.
this Yeah, content, it's brilliant. don't forget It's like to like and subscribe suddenly we're for not just more. talking about abstract principles, you know? We're actually meeting these real women who lived through real challenges and made real choices, all within the context of their faith.
Exactly. It's like stepping back in time and getting this glimpse into their lives. And Kidwai, he picked some seriously fascinating figures to focus on.
He really did. I mean, each of these women, they give us such a unique perspective on what it even meant to be a woman back then. And honestly, their stories, they still resonate so strongly today.
Okay, so first up we have Miriam, who a lot of people know her as Mary, the mother of Jesus.
Right.
And even if you're familiar with her story from, say, a Christian perspective, get ready, because the Quran's take on Miriam is powerful.
It really is. And it's not a coincidence that she's so deeply revered in both Islam and Christianity. I mean, her story goes way beyond just religious boundaries.
Totally. Kidwai, he points out verses like 66.11 and 21.91, where Miriam is praised for her piety, her devotion to God. But it's in Surah Maryam, chapter 19, where her story really unfolds. Like we see her receiving divine communication, giving birth to Jesus miraculously, and then witnessing his incredible abilities even as a baby.
And what I find so striking is that Miriam, she isn't just some passive figure in all of this.
Right.
She questions things, she worries, and ultimately she chooses to submit to God's will. Her story reminds us that women, they can be active participants in shaping their own destinies, even within a plan that's divinely ordained.
Such a powerful message. Okay, next we have another incredible woman, the Queen of Sheba. And now, she's not a prophet, but she is depicted as this incredibly wise and capable ruler. Like, she commands respect, she commands authority.
Yeah, and the Quran is not shy at all about showing her intelligence and her agency.
Right.
She's not just like sitting around looking pretty on her throne. This is a woman who is actively governing her kingdom, she's engaged in diplomacy, and she is not afraid to challenge Prophet Solomon when he sends her a message.
I love that. Kidwai really focuses on that aspect of her story. He points to Surah An-Naml, verses 27.22-44, and that's where we see her testing Solomon's wisdom, but she ultimately recognizes the truth of his message and converts to his faith.
Yeah, it's like this beautiful testament to how open-minded she is. She's willing to seek truth, even if it means challenging what she already believes.
Yeah. Talk about a powerful woman. Okay, last but definitely not least, we have Asiya, the wife of Pharaoh.
Oh,
Talk about a woman of strength and conviction.
her story, it really drives home the point that courage can be found in the most unexpected places.
Right. Imagine you're married to Pharaoh, the most powerful man in all of Egypt, a man who literally declared himself to be a god.
It's wild.
And yet, Asiya chooses to believe in the one God.
Talk about taking a stand. I mean, it would have been so easy for her to just go along with it, to conform to her husband's beliefs. But she listened to her heart, and she stood up for what she believed in, even if it meant risking literally everything.
Kidwai highlights verse 66.11, and that's where we learn that Asiya, she prayed for a house in paradise, a refuge from Pharaoh's tyranny. Her story is such a testament to the power of faith and the courage it takes to stay true to yourself, even when you're facing that kind of opposition.
Absolutely. These women, Miriam, the Queen of Sheba, Asiya, they completely shatter any simplistic ideas that people might have about what it means to be a woman in Islam. They were leaders, they were thinkers, they were believers, and their stories are still so inspiring today.
So true. And you know what else just blew my mind in this book? Kidwai has a whole section on women, Hadith, narrators, and scholars.
Oh, yeah.
I had no idea how many women played such a vital role in preserving and transmitting the Prophet's teachings.
It's incredible, and it really challenges that whole misconception that women were somehow excluded from religious scholarship in early Islam. Like, that's just not true at all. In reality, they were super involved in shaping Islamic thought and interpretation right from the very beginning.
Right. Kidwai actually mentions that there are over 2,700 hadiths that are attributed to women just in the 6 major collections. That's huge.
That's a lot of hadith.
And he gives us these little glimpses into the lives of some of these women, too.
Oh, yeah, like Aisha bint Abu Bakr, who was married to the Prophet.
Yes.
She was famous for her vast knowledge, and even male scholars would go to her to get her opinions on matters of Islamic law.
Amazing.
Or Salma, who was known for her piety, her wisdom, her incredible generosity.
And then there's Kalab bin Thalaba, who was so brave. She challenged this societal norm that she just knew was unjust. and she actually got a law changed.
Wow.
These women were powerhouses.
They really were. Their stories are such a good reminder that women, they've always been at the forefront of Islamic scholarship and activism. Like, they were shaping and enriching their faith with their intelligence, their compassion, their unwavering commitment to justice.
This deep dive has been such an incredible journey, you guys. We explored